If you've been following this channel for a while, you know that I'm a huge fan of the Lumix cameras and all their unique benefits and why I personally shoot Lumix as a choice over any other brand. But with the recent announcement of the S1R Mark II, I do want to put it in perspective that this is an easy street for Lumix. They do have some stiff competition, and that competition comes from Nikon. But before we get started, like this video, hit the subscribe button, and consider joining the channel. Channel members get exclusive access to Filmmaker Alchemy, behind-the-scenes lessons and insights on the business of video production. Learn how to turn your content into gold. Yes, today I'm going to be talking about the Nikon Z8. And before you start throwing hate and making fun of Nikon and all of that, because it's very easy and fun to kind of mock and poke fun at Nikon, let's be real. They have some amazing cameras that are incredibly powerful. And maybe you are a Nikon enthusiast. Maybe you love Nikon. I know there's plenty of people out there who are shooting Nikon, love it for photo and for video, because I think Nikon is starting to wake up. There was this sleeping giant, this beast in the East that was fast asleep. But when you look at recent moves from Nikon with how they've handled their Z mount and what they've been rolling out with the Z9, now offering a shutter angle. You've got something like the Z8 that shoots 8K 60, not 8K 30 like we're going to get on the S1R Mark II. The Nikon Z8 shoots 8K 60, and we've got the acquisition of red, and we have factors like the Z mount being adaptable from other mirrorless mounts. I didn't realize this until recently, but you can actually take Sony E-mount glass and with a simple adapter, use it on the Nikon Z mount. The flange distance, it's that small that you have that much room working with an E-mount lens. You can put it on the Z mount. Very cool feature for someone who's maybe got a bunch of Sony glass and they're looking at what body they're going to get next. And they're wondering, do I just get the next thing from Sony? Oh, wait, Nikon is over here making moves, acquiring red. Now they're slowly trickling out some of those updates. Nothing too crazy just yet, but they have some incredible cameras. The Z6, I believe they're on the Mark III now. But let's look at the Z8 because I think that's the biggest rival for the S1R Mark II and what Lumix is offering compared to Nikon. Lumix, you do have the still unique features, open gate and shutter angle. The Z8 doesn't have those, but it's rumored that Nikon is working on that in the background. And maybe at some point with a firmware update, it's just, one small element, one small update could tip the scale in Nikon's favor because the Z8 already does. It's a similar 44 megapixel to 45 megapixel. Like, who's going to argue? The Nikon sensor is stacked, which has some benefits in terms of readout speed, but maybe sacrifices a little bit in dynamic range. Realistically, at the end of the day, on paper, the S1R Mark II and the Nikon Z8 are very similar in terms of specs and what you're able to use them for. It really comes down to how they feel to use, what that actual experience is like shooting with them. So in either situation, I would always recommend rent before you buy, try before you buy, however you can. If you have some sort of dealer in your area where you can go in and get your hands on these things, great. If not, spend the $100 just to rent a camera for a week and shoot with it before you make the purchase and the investment in something as big as investing in a whole lens mount. Because with Lumix, you're going L mount, Nikon, you're going Z mount, and both of those come with some considerations that you have to keep in mind when you're making these purchases. But the Nikon Z8 is actually cheaper than the S1R Mark II right now. The Z8 has been out for a while, but still, pound for pound, it's packed with these features that are very equivalent to what Lumix is offering with the S1R Mark II. If you're looking for a budget option, I would still recommend something like the Lumix S5 Mark II. Great, incredible, super powerful, budget-friendly camera. Full frame, phase hybrid autofocus, all the bells and whistles, open gate, shutter angle, all the great stuff you love about Lumix in the S5 Mark II. But if you're stretching your budget, you're reaching a little bit higher, looking for that flagship model, the thing that has the most resolution, the most features, the best bang for the buck, maybe not the best bang for the buck, but the most bang, certainly, for those dollars, the Nikon Z8 is really, really attractive on paper. But one of those things you have to get in your hand to actually know if it's going to be useful for you. But when you look at the features, you look at them side by side, you look at the comparison, Nikon is really doing a great job. And I think if they keep pushing, what they're doing with video and this hybrid mentality, they could actually gobble up a decent chunk of the market. Sony is kind of asleep at the wheel a little bit. Canon is off doing their own thing, in their own exclusive Canon club. Nikon has a lot of opportunity here to actually make moves that would get people like me, like you, maybe other shooters out there going, okay, well, if I'm spending my hard-earned dollars on something, I want it to be the most useful, the most flexible, the best option, the right tool for the job. All of those things are always in our consideration. And we start comparing apples to apples, oranges to oranges, looking at, okay, who's offering what? Nikon certainly makes a lot of sense for certain shooters, whether you're into photography, video, or both. As I am, I love that hybrid mindset, that hybrid mentality that's so valuable for clients these days. When you need to shoot a video, you need to shoot a reel, you need to shoot a photo. If you can do it all with one camera body, that's ideal. Now, me personally, I have a long history with Nikon, but I will say that back in the day, they made some really good mirror-style DSLR cameras that were competitive in terms of price point, but using them was never my favorite. I ended up selling my Nikon in favor of Lumix at the time, and I've stuck with that because it just made the most sense as a hybrid shooter for so long, dealing with some of the limitations of micro four thirds, but also some of the advantages of micro four thirds, and really just trying to stay having the right tools in my kit that gave me the best advantage cutting edge. But there are also considerations about value, right? When it comes to maybe you have a project that requires more than one camera, all of a sudden you start adding 2, 3, 4 cameras. The price adds up quickly. You're investing in more lenses, more batteries, more memory cards, all of those things. So cost does matter at a certain degree. And I would always recommend buy the best that you can afford. Don't over invest. Don't overstretch yourself. If you're even considering an S1R Mark II or a Nikon Z8 and you're looking at something upwards of $3,000 just for the camera and going, I don't know if that makes sense for me. Trust your gut. Don't go into debt. Don't spend a bunch of money on just one camera body, because at the end of the day, there will always be a new one later and greater. The prices always come down over time. These investments do make sense if you're using them for work, but if you're taking on more debt than you can afford, just go with what you can afford. It's never worth it to spend $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 investing in something when you don't have the business justification to do it. I know a lot of people think I'm going to buy it and then the work will come, kind of Field of Dreams, build it and he will come, build it and they will come, buy it and those clients are going to show up, and that's very rarely the case. Save your money, buy what you can afford. And if that is something like the Nikon Z8 or the Lumix S1R Mark II or the Canon R5 Mark II or whatever Sony has to offer, there's options for everyone. For me, open gate and shutter angle are such big deal breakers. They're such important functions and features to how I shoot that I can't really, sacrifice them. But if another company quickly adds them, that's what puts Lumix in jeopardy. So it's the balance of these scales could shift any day, any month, any year. It's one thing to say you buy the camera because you have the lenses and you're invested in it. But when these camera companies start pushing and offering really valuable features, something like 8K 60, internal RAW, and you're comparing them on paper, you really got to make the best decision for you. And you kind of brand loyalty goes out the window, because are you going to want to deal with limitations just because you like the brand? No, of course not. We have no loyalty or allegiance here. We're going to use the right tool for the job. We're going to do what we can with the best that's available and get those features that we need. For me, for the longest time, open gate and shutter angle have been those things that why I've loved the Lumix cameras, the menus, the layout of the buttons, the functionality, the features. It's all great. It's all awesome. But also, these other companies could easily do some of those same things as well. And then yet there's companies that choose to make decisions that go against what would be best for the customers, putting things behind paid upgrades, not rolling out firmware, being slow to implement some of these things, dealing with just clunky layout and design. There's always personal preference, and it comes down to what you want to shoot with, what you like to shoot with, and what gives you those best results. And for me, that has been Lumix historically, but Nikon could easily creep in there and say, hey, we've got you shutter angle, we've got open gate for you, plus all this extra stuff at a cheaper price point. And maybe that would be enough for you or me. I don't know, because we don't live in that world, but it's a hypothetical that is not too far outside of reality. We've also got DJI in the background, supposedly making an L-mount camera. Supposedly Sigma is still making L-mount cameras, but you're wondering like, what kind of cameras are these Sigma? Like, okay, interesting philosophy, I guess. Design, aesthetic, all right, cool, but also I need something functional. So please, could we get more of that? It's a cool time to be paying attention to all this stuff because the specs keep getting higher and higher. We've got eye-bleeding levels of resolution and detail in both photo and video. We've got all the crazy color we could ever imagine. We've got internal RAW on these hybrid cameras, autofocus that is just, flawless. It's perfect. The autofocus sometimes and what it can do beyond what a human could do in real time. Subject detection, great, advanced. We've got the fastest memory cards ever. We've got so many great features, and yet there's still so much more room for improvement and added functionality. Things like internal NDs. I'll probably talk about it in every single video because I think it's that important and what we could get there. Or even like 32-bit audio, internal, right in body. IBIS was the biggest feature a while back, and that's continued to advance. And we've got, incremental improvements with each camera body. The IBIS gets a little bit better and better. Maybe that is one of the big advantages of the Lumix system, that their IBIS just is so good. I haven't actually tested the Nikon IBIS to see how it performs in both photo and video. Lumix, though, I can swear by. It's incredible, the IBIS you can get with those camera bodies. So it really just comes down to like who's going to give us the best features for the lowest price, and who's going to make the camera that actually is fun to use, is comfortable to use. It's one thing to have specs on paper and look how great it is and the numbers keep getting higher. But if that comes with what's the usability like, what's that interface like, that's kind of what I favor more, and which is why I always go back to recommending try before you buy, rent these things, test them out. Just because something looks good on paper doesn't mean it actually is. And when it comes down to using it, it might be a total pain. And I will always sacrifice those, specs. It's not about the highest specs or the lowest price. It always comes down to how does it feel to use, and is it fun? Is it enjoyable? Is it fast? Is it efficient? Is it actually effortless? Those are all things I value way more than one number being higher than another number, 45 versus 44 or 8K 60 versus 8K 30. At the end of the day, I can always work around those specs. I can't work around some of the built-in limitations of how are the buttons laid out, what's the menu like, what's the interface, how fast is it to access certain of these functions. If it takes me one step over here on this camera, but it takes me 5 steps over here on this camera, I'm always going to favor the one that's just faster, simpler, more efficient, more effortless. And that's what I always prefer. I've found that personally with the Lumix cameras. They just seem to work that way for me. Other people might have their preference based on their muscle memory and what makes sense to their brain. I've never found the Sony cameras to be all that intuitive. It's probably something you definitely can learn, but for all the times I've used them, it's never quite clicked for me in the way that it has with the Lumix cameras. And coming from Canon, I feel like there's very similar layouts and designs around how a camera should be built and how it should feel to use that I appreciate about both of those systems. Nikon, I'm kind of wondering, is this time to test out something like the Z8? Is it worth it? It's a big move, but I don't know. What do you think? Have you used the Nikon Z8? Are you excited for the Lumix S1R Mark II? What are your thoughts? I'd love to hear them because I think that's how we all get smarter and better and more informed. There's always those little gotchas. Any camera that you use, you go, oh, actually, yes, but, check these things out. Make sure you pay attention to this because on the marketing, on the product pages, they always tell you the best features. They don't ever tell you the limitations, hardly ever. They'll never tell you the restrictions, limitations. So if you do have experience with any of these cameras or other ones, let me know because I always think those insights are some of the most valuable things to get from the comment section. That's where you go for the real information, right? Even this video, go to the comments. There's people down there smarter than me who will tell you all the ins and the outs and the in-betweens of all of this stuff and more because that's where the biggest brains are, is down in the comments. So let me know what you think. I'd love to hear it.